Hi everyone. This week we spoke to Isabel Hardman. Isabel is assistant editor at The Spectator and a best-selling author who's recently written about the impact of nature on her mental health and mental health more widely. We spoke about her own experiences of mental health and how nature, and in particular open water swimming and the outdoors, have helped her. We also looked at how coronavirus may change our relationship to nature and the natural world for good. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. Hi Isabel, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So to start with, we always ask about what your kind of personal experience around mental health is.
So I've had post-traumatic stress disorder for about 4 years now. Some bad things happened in my personal life, which I don't talk about in public, but they led to me developing depressive symptoms, very bad anxiety and paranoia. I started to have suicidal thoughts and eventually had a mental breakdown, which meant that I couldn't work for quite a few months. And I've really spent the past few years since then trying to get back on my feet mentally. And for me, there have been three things which have really helped. One has been taking antidepressants, which have really leveled my mood most of the time. Having therapy, which has helped me work through the bad things that happened to me and also develop healthy coping mechanisms and dealing with bad patterns of thinking. But finally, and I think most powerfully, being outdoors in nature has just given me a reason to keep living and has helped me to calm down so many times over the past few years.
Yeah, something that I completely agree with. And was it specifically the combination of things that helped? So when I was at a kind of lowest ebb, the antidepressants were the thing that kind of I was reluctant to take at the start, but they were the kind of things that helped me get out and do the stuff like exercise and playing cricket and golf and things like that. They kind of let me do that. Was it the same with you and the antidepressants, and then kind of allowing you to appreciate nature more?
Yeah, I think the three things worked together, but similarly, yes. Without the antidepressants, I don't think I would have been able to control some of the sort of worst thoughts and also just the really debilitating low mood that I was having as well. So it's very hard for me to separate those three things. And people often say, oh, does it mean that you aren't depressed anymore because you're spending so much time in nature, or have you been able to give up your antidepressants? And no, actually, I'm on the strongest dose I've ever been on at the moment. But without my time in nature, I think I probably would have been sicker. So it's quite hard to separate those three things, but all of them have been essential.
Yeah, definitely. And what is it about kind of being in nature and exploring and kind of just being outside that you think really helps you?
Well, from my personal experience, it's a number of things. One is that it just restores my mind, and there's a lot of research into this. There's a theory called attention restoration theory, which has been developed over the past couple of decades, which says that the soft fascination of nature, so the sight of leaves, the sight of flowers, birds, and so on, helps us to restore our minds and to restore our focus, and that's definitely helped. Also, distracting me from negative thoughts because I'm so fascinated by what I'm seeing, whether it's a barn owl hunting at dusk or whether it's a really rare wildflower that I've been looking for 4 hours. That those things help me focus on something that isn't the washing machine of bad thoughts in my head. And I suppose that's a lot of the principles of mindfulness that lots of people are really into, that I found very hard to get to grips with to begin with, I have to say. What mindfulness does is it focuses you on the present moment, on what's actually happening at the moment, rather than the terrifying thoughts you have in your head. There's a saying, I think it's by Mark Twain, which is, I've had a terrible life and most of it never happened. And I think a lot of people listening to this, and probably you, can relate to that, where we just have all these catastrophes which might happen in our mind. Well, for me, nature takes me away from that and makes me focus on what's in front of me. And that's a really good way of me reminding myself that actually the things I'm feeling just aren't real.
Yeah, that quote is particularly kind of applicable to chronic pain because most of the pain is actually imagined. So it's like there's nothing actually particularly wrong with your body, but if you went in an MRI or anything like that, it would show up highlighting the same areas in your brain. So although it's imagined, it feels exactly like you would be in pain. So what activities, like, in particular were good? Was it kind of going out on long walks or gardening, or I think you've spoken a bit about like open water swimming, which is something I'm not going to be taking up anytime soon, but seems to have helped you.
Yeah, it's been a real mix of things, and different things have worked at different times and will work for different people. Um, for me, I have to say that I had a very similar attitude to cold water swimming until I tried it, and it has really been such a powerful weapon in the way I've dealt with my mental illness. It has a sort of a shock therapy aspect to it, which helps you tame your fight or flight instinct, and that goes wrong for a lot of people when they're mentally ill. For me, it led to me being very frightened all the time that something bad was going to happen, but also very angry. And I think most people who know me would say I'm quite a placid person naturally, but I have spent the past 4 years unnaturally angry in sort of situations that don't merit that at all. And cold water swimming has helped me to tame those feelings, as well as it just being really wonderful to be in nature, because you're swimming in lakes rather than in an indoor pool. And I don't find indoor pools at all enjoyable. The sort of echoey shouting that bounces off the roof, and the incredibly strong chlorine. If you're swimming in a lake, you see a kingfisher rattling over the surface of the water. You see ducks. You can smell the trees, the nature around you, and it really is a wonderfully restorative experience. Running similarly has been great for me because, as we know, that it releases endorphins and various other chemicals which help lift our mood. It's also really good for our physical health, and a lot of people with mental illnesses do end up with quite bad physical health, not just because of the restrictions that a mental illness can put on your life, but also because of the medication that is often prescribed is very old and crude and can lead to weight gain. So that sort of exercise is really important. Another thing that I talk a lot about is just following nature. So looking for wildflowers, photographing birds in particular, two things I absolutely love, because I just get so lost in the process of looking for these flowers or these creatures, and then so lifted by the wonder of the natural world that it just gives me a very simple impetus to keep going and to see more of this incredibly rich world that I'm lucky to be alive in at the moment.
Yeah, I said I wasn't particularly going to give open water swimming a go, but my dad is actually Swedish, and one of the things, like most years, we normally spend like 2 weeks in Sweden, and one of the things I do actually enjoy most there is getting in the sauna and then like jumping, not really swimming, like jumping into very cold water. It kind of gives you that, I suppose it's like a shock.
Yes,
And it does,
absolutely.
like, thinking about it, it does actually make me feel, I don't know if it's kind of psychosomatic, but I don't know if it, like, it helps me feel like better for like a few minutes, because it just kind of really wakes you up. But I don't know if that's backed up by any kind of, if that's just a feeling I've got, or if it's...
No, it is that there is some really good research into cold water swimming. I should say that on all things mental health, whether it's the drugs that are prescribed, the therapy that is carried out, or indeed interventions in the natural world, there isn't enough of a research base, and we really need to spend more on research for mental health generally. But the research that is there is very good on cold water swimming, on the impact it can have on our mental state. There's a doctor called Mark Harper who does a lot with the Outdoor Swimming Society, who's looked into this and is trying to do as much as he can to examine it and understand it more. And again, it goes back to this fight or flight instinct that a lot of us struggle with when we're unwell.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that you kind of highlighted in your book was, that I suppose has been probably exacerbated at the moment, was the kind of unequal access to outdoor spaces in nature that we kind of have at the moment. And I suppose that's kind of been exacerbated by issues of being trapped in the house the whole time. Can you explain a little bit about that and how you think we can move towards more social prescribing of things like nature for mental health issues?
Sure, yeah. So firstly, I think there is a popular misconception that you have to somehow travel somewhere official to see nature. And it's great that we have so many nature reserves in this country, but they are not the only place where you can see nature. And one of the, I think, the good things that has come out of lockdown is that people started to notice what was already around them, even out of their sort of, city centre flats, that you can see birds out of your window that aren't just pigeons. You can see amazing birds of prey that, like peregrine falcons, which nest on buildings in cities. You can see as you're walking, even when lockdown was particularly strict, when you're on your short exercise every day walk, you can see wildflowers growing in the cracks in the pavements. And a lot of it is about us refocusing our attention away from, I have to say, our phones and what's going on in our heads, onto what's actually around us and noticing that. And I think a lot of people were amazed by what they could see and hear around them that they'd never really paid any attention to before. So I think that's really important. But it is the case that if you are from a disadvantaged background, you are going to find it harder to access green spaces because there just aren't as many of them around where you live. And there's been a lot of work on this by reports commissioned by the government and so on, that the people in disadvantaged groups don't have that access. And that is something that really needs to change, not just in terms of outdoor spaces, actually, but also in terms of indoors. So if you're in social housing, for instance, I used to be a housing journalist. One of the worst developments I ever visited was not an old crumbling block from the 60s or the 70s. It was actually a recently built block of affordable housing on the edge of a prestigious development. And there were lots of things that were wrong with it, but one of the things that I found particularly oppressive about it was that the windows were tiny. When glass is very expensive, windows are expensive, and so in affordable housing it tends to be smaller, even though natural light and views of the natural world are really good for our mental health, which is really important, particularly for people in social housing who are more likely to have mental health problems. So there is this vicious cycle that we're creating of people who are from disadvantaged backgrounds who are going to benefit more from access to nature, who can't access it as easily as those from the middle classes. And I am very middle class, and I don't shy away from that. But I think that it's deeply unfair that someone like me should find it easier to access the natural health service than somebody whose accident of birth has been different.
Can you see like coronavirus having an impact on the way maybe that we design, I suppose maybe our cities are too late, but the way we design our buildings and our cities? Because you see examples, I can't remember if it was you that wrote about it, but there's an amazing hospital in Singapore which has really incorporated like plants and things into the actual building, and the results they get just of patients with all kinds of diseases being able to look out a window is like phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a lot of long-standing research into the impact of natural views, not just on mental illness, but also on physical ailments. So there was research done a few decades ago which showed that patients recovering from gallbladder surgery who had a view of the natural world were more likely to make a good recovery and less likely to need painkillers, which is incredible. It's fantastic that nature is that powerful. And I guess we do have a lot of hospitals which have long ago been built, but apparently we're going to get 40 new hospitals under the Conservatives. So I suppose that's 40 new opportunities for a biophilic, as it's known, design to be included. But there are lots of things that you can do to retrofit buildings and towns so that they do become greener, and so it is easier for people to access nature. We've seen a little bit of that during lockdown, actually, with particularly in London and Manchester, streets being changed so that it's easier to cycle, and so that it's harder for vehicles to get down, so that people can go about their business using greener forms of transport, which actually bring them into better contact with nature. And all of these things are really important for us to consider. to look at new town planning, new architecture, but also to think about the housing stock and the office stock that we have at the moment and how we can change that.
Yeah, and I think something like increasing the pedestrianisation of inner cities is like has so many co-benefits as well in terms of reducing noise pollution,
Absolutely.
air pollution,
yeah.
kind of just general health anyway. So looking particularly at your book, what were your kind of I don't know if favourite's the right word, but what were the stories and the people, who were the ones that you enjoyed meeting most and found, I don't really like the word inspiring around mental health, but who did you find the most interesting, I suppose?
So I suppose selfishly, one of my favourites was someone whose interview had a huge impact on how I approached my own mental health, a man called Kevin Widdowson, who has worked for various wildlife trusts, has also suffered from major depressive disorder for a number of years himself, and has been in and out of hospital with that illness. And I was talking to him at the very start of writing this book when I was still pretty ill, actually. And he told me that as part of his therapy, he'd been trying mindfulness, and my heart sank because I thought, oh my goodness, I've tried mindfulness. It just drives me mad. I lie in a room in silence, trying to get in touch with my body and in touch with the present moment. And what will happen is all the thoughts I've been successfully keeping out all day will just come rushing in because I'm not distracting myself. And so I found it very demoralizing. But Kevin said that he and his therapist had worked out a way of him doing mindfulness outdoors. And it was actually him going out for a walk and noticing the plants around him and really focusing on that. And that was the thing that brought him back into the present moment and stopped him from going off into catastrophizing and thinking all sorts of unwell thoughts, and noticing what he was actually experiencing at that very moment. And I started doing that, and it's made a huge difference to me. It's meant that I can now do conventional mindfulness because I've built up enough mental muscle to do it, but it also is something that I do every day, just to bring me back to the present moment, to restore my mind. And it's hugely powerful. I often put my phone on airplane mode when I'm walking my dogs, and just focus on the trees and listening for the birds and listening for other sounds that even when you feel you're quite in touch with nature, you might not notice. Like, for instance, the sound of raindrops bouncing off the leaves and then onto the ground, or even the sound of leaves scratching against one another in the breeze. All of those things just bring me back to the present moment. So that interview with Kevin was really powerful. There was also an interview I did with a chap called John, who had been homeless, slept rough for a number of years, has had really bad mental health problems all of his life. And he has really improved thanks to gardening. And a lot of people will say, well, yes, we know that there's a great link between gardening and mental health, and this isn't surprising. But what I found surprising was that he wasn't actually that bothered about gardening itself. For him, it was the social contact and the sense of purpose that it gave him. And it actually got him into paid work with the charity Thrive, who were helping him at the time. So gardening has changed his life, but not in the way that I'd expected. I'd focused solely on the plants because I'm a keen gardener myself. I hadn't thought of the power that gardening in a group can have for someone whose social skills have been really undermined by a decade of sleeping rough. And for John, he found that the gardening side of things was incidental to the way in which being around other people helped him. And so that was really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool story. And also, to kind of go back to the mindfulness stuff, the kind of first session I had with my psychologist, he was like, yeah, we'll try doing this. And I was like, how on earth is something like this going to help me when I'm like in agony? And I was like, this is complete bullshit. Like, I came here wanting to have some kind of thing that was going to help me, that I could turn to. So I kind of dipped in and out of it for quite a long time, which it sounds like you did a bit, until I realised that A, I could do it lying down or walking around, and B, that I didn't have to dive right in at the deep end, doing like 40 minutes of sitting down with my legs crossed. So I think the way that you, and I can't remember the guy's name that you were talking about, got into it, kind of got introduced to it more gradually, is a much better way of doing things. And another thing that I've seen you write about is how good your work were with you when you needed to take, periods of time off. Is that something that you think is pretty pervasive across all workplaces, or do you think there was something that they just got specifically right? And how can we, I suppose, implement that across a wider range of workspaces?
Sure. Yeah, I think my experience is pretty uncommon, actually. I've been very, very lucky to have a very supportive employer. I was lucky that I've been working at the Spectator for a number of years. By this point, I was well established in my career. I'd won awards for being a political journalist by this point. And so if I'd got sick when I was a very junior member of staff, I would have been treated well by the Spectator too. But I think they really went above and beyond because they knew me, they trusted me, and they wanted me to carry on working for them. They saw me as an asset, and so I'll always be hugely grateful to my editor, Fraser Nelson, for the way that he managed my illness and my sick leave and my return to work. They did a phased return for me, and I've really changed a huge amount about the way I work, because unfortunately I haven't gone back to how I was before, and I do have to take time out, sometimes unexpectedly, as a result of my ongoing mental health problems, and the Spectator have worked around that. And I know that's not possible for all employers, but I think what the Spectator have done, which everyone can emulate, is think creatively about how to keep an employee and to see the things that they bring to the workplace as still existing, but that there need to be reasonable adjustments for that mental illness, so that person can carry on working. And I've now been the Spectator for 8 years, and I have absolutely no plans to go anywhere, because I love working for them, and I'm very grateful for the support they've given me. And I think it's made me a better employee because I've been so well looked after as well. I think things that employers could do to ensure that the general mental well-being of their employees, whether or not they have diagnosed mental health problems, is encourage them to get outside during the day. So don't have a workplace culture where you're all dropping crumbs into your keyboards at lunchtime, that actually going outside for a walk, having meetings outside. Even Fraser Nelson, my boss, often suggests we walk around St James's Park when we're having a meeting, rather than just sitting indoors. What about staff socials? Does everything necessarily need to be centred around the pub? As much as I, as a journalist, love spending time in the pub, I do find that going for a walk or doing sort of outdoor thing is much better for my well-being, and it's probably more inclusive, actually, for members of staff who don't want to drink, who just find the pub a bit boring, and he's still uncomfortable in a drinking setting as well. So thinking about things like that. I used to work for I worked for an organisation which, instead of having booze ups, decided to do staff walks in a really nice part of the southwest of England, and that was really good. And I think I got to know my colleagues better, and probably in a better light than when people are off their faces having spent all day drinking.
Yeah, to kind of start wrapping things up, we always ask what you kind of personally do to look after your mental health at the moment, and I suppose it's going to be a lot centered around nature.
Well, at the moment I have a 2-month-old baby, so I've had to change the way I do things quite dramatically to ensure that I am still looking after my mental health and getting outdoors. The great thing about babies is that you can take them out on walks in the pram and they fall asleep, and so I've been doing a lot of walking with my son, and he seems to really love looking up at the tree canopy in the woods where I walk the dogs, and that seems to relax him. And also I have tried to make time to get to exercise classes and to spend a bit of time on my indoor bike, handing baby to my partner or to his older sisters, so that they look after him, just so I get a bit of space, and that I do some really vigorous exercise as well, because that makes a huge difference to my mental well-being. People often when you're talking about how to look after your mental health, they'll say, oh, but what about this situation where you have a small child, or you're very busy at work, or and I understand that there are barriers to enjoying the natural world and that everyone has time constraints. But I think that the most important thing is being creative and thinking, well, I do still really need to look after myself. So how am I going to make that a priority, even, while looking after a tiny baby? And for me, this time of being a new mum, it's been really important to me to work that out early on, because I know that without the natural world, I start to get ill, and I want to be a good mummy to my son, and I want to stay as healthy as possible. And so being outside and in nature helps me to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that that even when we're in situations that might be really stressful or time consuming, that it's important to try and create that time to look after our mental health, because it will help you hopefully be better at the things that are taking up your time and things like that. So where can we find more about what you do? Your book, which I really enjoyed, especially it kind of got me back into, I used to be obsessed with butterflies, and it got me back into like butterfly spotting. But also I live in the Chilterns, which has loads of red kites and deer, and like I live quite close to the River Chess, which has got loads of trout and stuff in. So that it kind of inspired me to get out and do a bit more walking and nature spotting. But yeah, where can we find out more about all that kind of stuff?
Well, obviously read my book, The Natural Health Service, and I think if you want to start getting more involved in nature and you don't really know where to start, then look at some of the big charities operating in this space. So Plant Life for Wildflowers, Butterfly Conservation, the RSPB, and so on. That they're all starting to get more and more into the mental health benefits of nature, not just because they know themselves from a lot of their own staff that being in nature is good for them, but there's also if we see nature as something that we benefit from, then nature benefits from us, because we're more likely to protect it. And obviously our natural world is under huge threat at the moment, and so the more people who need nature, the more nature will benefit from our protections.
Brilliant.
I think
that's a really good place to leave it. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Great. No, thanks.
Hi everyone, I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a quick note to say that although the things Isabel and I talked about we may find helpful, we're not trained medical professionals. If you're struggling with your mental health, please contact your GP or an organisation like Samaritans on 116 123.